The airport was already buzzing when the morning sun rose behind the glass walls, sending warm light across the long lines of travelers. People hurried past each other with rolling bags and half-finished coffee cups. Each person lost in their own world and their own destination. In the middle of all this noise and movement walked a young girl named Lena, holding tightly to her aunt's hand. It was her first time taking a long flight. She looked around with a mix of excitement and nervous curiosity. Lena's aunt had planned the trip for weeks, making sure everything would run smoothly. She had checked their luggage twice, printed out the boarding passes the night before, and even packed Lena's favorite small sketch pouch in her carry-on bag. Lena loved drawing. It helped her relax when things around her felt big and unfamiliar. On this trip, the sketch pouch was the one thing she had insisted she'd bring. Inside were a few pencils, a tiny eraser, and a thin notebook filled with simple drawings she had made at home. As they got closer to the boarding gate, Lena's aunt could feel the girl's hand trembling. She bent down slightly and whispered, "You're going to be fine. The flight is just like sitting in a long bus ride, okay? And if you feel scared, I'm right beside you." Lena nodded, trying to smile. She took a deep breath and held onto her bag as the line to board the plane slowly moved forward. The flight attendants at the gate were greeting passengers one by one. Most of them had warm expressions, wishing travelers a safe flight. But one of the attendants, a woman with a stiff posture and a serious expression, did not seem as welcoming as the rest. She looked tired or maybe annoyed. When people walked by her, she gave short nods and kept her eyes sharp, as if waiting for someone to make a mistake. When it was finally Lena's turn to walk forward, her aunt handed their boarding passes to the attendant. The woman scanned them, handed them back, and waved them through without saying anything. Lena's aunt gently guided her toward the plane, noticing the way the attendant's eyes lingered on them, but she chose not to think too much about it. Inside the aircraft, the air smelled like soft fabric and cleaning spray. The narrow aisle felt crowded as passengers tried to fit their bags into overhead bins or squeezed past each other to reach their seats. Lena walked carefully, holding her sketch pouch close to her chest so it wouldn't fall. She kept trying to look out the small windows. But people were blocking most of the view. Their seats were near the middle of the plane. Lena took the window seat, as she had hoped for. Her aunt sat beside her, placing their small bags under the seats and making sure Lena buckled her seatbelt correctly. The girl pressed her forehead lightly against the window, watching the workers outside move luggage carts and fuel trucks. She was scared, but also amazed. Everything felt big and unreal. After a few minutes, the passengers began settling in. The overhead announcements played a gentle tune as a reminder for everyone to take their seats. Lena tried to distract herself by opening her little sketch pouch. She pulled out her notebook and flipped through the pages. Drawing always made her feel calm. Before she could start a new sketch, someone's shadow fell over her. A voice followed soon after, a sharp, tense voice. "Excuse me, what is that you're holding?" the flight attendant asked. Lena looked up, surprised. It was the same woman from the boarding gate. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed as she pointed toward the small pouch on Lena's lap. Lena blinked, unsure why she was being questioned. "It's my drawing stuff," she said softly. The attendant took a step closer. "You're not allowed to have certain items out right now." "Is that sharp? Is there something inside that could cause trouble?" Lena froze. The way the woman spoke felt like she had done something terribly wrong, even though she hadn't. Her aunt turned in her seat, confused by the sudden tension. "It's just a sketch pouch," her aunt said calmly. "A few pencils and a small notebook. Nothing dangerous." But the attendant didn't seem satisfied. She raised her voice slightly, just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We have rules on this flight. Everyone needs to follow them. You can't have items that could be unsafe." Lena felt her throat tighten. She looked around and saw people glancing their way, curious, wanting to know what was happening. Some raised their eyebrows. Others looked concerned. Lena hated being the center of attention. Her chest felt heavy, and she gripped the pouch a little too tightly. Her aunt tried again, keeping her voice soft but firm. "She's 12. She's allowed to have pencils. She's not harming anyone." The attendant sighed loudly, like she was tired of explaining herself. You need to ensure the child follows instructions. It's not optional. The words stung Lena more than she expected. She felt like she had been accused of something without even understanding what was wrong. Her aunt reached over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's okay. Just take a breath. But the girl's heart was racing, and her eyes were filling with tears. She tried hard not to let fall. A small voice from a nearby seat broke the tension for a moment. She's just drawing. Why is that a problem? A middle-aged woman asked politely. She looked genuinely confused. The attendant turned toward the woman, forcing a tight smile. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. I'm simply enforcing safety rules. The woman looked unconvinced, but stayed quiet. Meanwhile, Lena felt her cheeks growing warm as more passengers turned their heads. Her aunt gave her a worried look. She knew the girl was sensitive to public attention, especially when it involved an adult scolding her for something she didn't do. The attendant then extended her hand toward Lena's pouch. Let me see that. Lena hesitated, gripping it tighter. Her aunt gently touched her hand. Just show her, sweetheart. It's okay. With shaky fingers, Lena handed the pouch over. The attendant opened it quickly, as if expecting something dangerous to burst out. Instead, she found exactly what Lena had said. A few pencils, tiny eraser, and a thin notebook filled with childlike drawings. Still, the attendant's expression didn't soften. This should have stayed inside the bag until after takeoff. You didn't tell us that? Lena's aunt replied quietly. The attendant ignored the comment and placed the pouch back in Lena's lap. Not gently, but not roughly, either just with enough force to make Lena flinch. Put it away, she ordered. Lena nodded quickly, her hands trembling as she closed the zipper. She slid the pouch into her bag as fast as she could. Wishing she could disappear, the attendant walked away without another word, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Lena stared at her hands. They were shaking. Her aunt leaned closer and whispered, You did nothing wrong. Don't let that get to you. But it was already too late. Lena felt small, embarrassed, and confused. The joy she had felt earlier had drained away. She didn't look out the window anymore. Instead, she wiped her eyes quietly, trying not to let anyone see her tears. A few rows behind them, a pair of passengers exchanged glances. One of them, a man with gentle eyes, shook his head. That wasn't right, he whispered to the person next to him. Another flight attendant, younger and softer spoken, noticed Lena's distress as she walked past. She paused for a moment, observing the way the girl held her hands tightly together and how her aunt kept rubbing her back to comfort her. The young attendant's face softened. Something wasn't sitting right with her. She glanced toward the front of the cabin where the older attendant stood, organizing items on a cart with stiff movements. Her expression was unreadable. The younger attendant bent down slightly and whispered to Lena's aunt, Is everything okay here? Lena's aunt hesitated. She didn't want to cause more trouble, but the moment had clearly shaken Lena. She's just upset. The earlier interaction was a bit harsh. The younger attendant nodded, concern growing in her eyes. I saw some of it. I'll let our lead attendant know. We want everyone to feel safe and comfortable. She gave Lena a warm smile before walking toward the front of the plane. Lena didn't smile back. She couldn't. She felt too overwhelmed. But her aunt squeezed her hand gently. Someone noticed. She whispered, It's going to be okay. Outside the window, the luggage carts had moved away, and the plane's engines were starting to hum louder. Passengers finished fastening their seatbelts as the final boarding call echoed softly in the cabin. But inside, the mood around Lena's row felt tense and uneasy. People had seen what happened. They had felt the shift. And while no one said anything out loud, the silence itself carried a quiet sense of disagreement as the plane prepared to pull back from the gate. The young attendant approached the lead attendant at the front. She spoke softly, but urgently, explaining what she had witnessed. The lead attendant, a calm and experienced man, listened carefully. His expression changed slightly as he looked toward Lena's row. He knew something needed to be addressed soon, and while Lena didn't know it yet, this moment, the one that had made her feel ashamed and singled out, was about to become the turning point of the entire flight. For now, though she sat quietly beside her aunt, wishing the world would stop staring at her, wishing she could just draw like she always did when she was nervous, but her pouch remained in her bag, zipped shut, untouched. The engines grew louder. The cabin lights dimmed. The safety demonstration began, but Lena didn't hear any of it. She was still replaying the attendant's sharp voice in her mind, still feeling the weight of all the eyes that had turned toward her, and outside the closed door of the cockpit, the flight crew was quietly preparing to step in, unaware of just how important their actions would become. The plane began to move slowly away from the gate, and the soft rumble under the seats made Lena grip the armrest. Her aunt leaned closer, whispering, "We're just rolling back. This part is easy." But Lena's mind was still stuck on the sharp voice of the attendant who had confronted her. It echoed in her thoughts like a sound she couldn't turn off. She kept her eyes down, staring at her hands. They still felt shaky, and she pressed them together to make them stop trembling. Her aunt tried to distract her by pointing outside the window, but the girl couldn't focus. It was like everything around her had faded into a dull blur. The younger flight attendant from earlier quietly walked through the aisle again, making sure seatbelts were fastened. When she passed Lena, she slowed down slightly and crouched near her row. Her voice was soft, almost like she didn't want to draw attention. "Hey," she whispered, giving Lena a gentle smile. "Are you feeling okay?" Lena didn't know how to answer. The words got stuck in her throat, but she nodded stiffly. Her aunt spoke without raising her voice, keeping things calm. "She's just a bit shaken from earlier." The attendant nodded, then leaned a little closer. "If either of you need anything, press the call button, okay? I'm nearby." Her smile lingered for a second longer before she stood and kept moving. Lena watched her walk away. Something about her kindness felt like a small bit of warmth in the middle of a cold moment. The seatbelt signs turned on. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The safety demonstration ended. Passengers straightened in their seats, some closing their eyes, others lifting their phones to record the takeoff through the open windows. The engines grew louder until the whole plane vibrated. Lena pulled in a sharp breath, and her aunt gave her hand a squeeze. "Look outside," her aunt said softly. "You might like seeing us lift off." Lena turned her head just in time to see the runway rushing by, getting faster and faster until the plane tilted upward. Her stomach dropped for a moment, but the view outside was too beautiful for her to look away. The ground pulled farther back, and the buildings shrank like tiny toys slowly. The noise around her faded into the background. For a moment, she forgot everything else, but that peacefulness only lasted a short while. When the plane reached the sky and leveled out, passengers started settling in again. Some unbuckled their seatbelts and stretched. Others opened books or tablets. Children asked for snacks from their parents. The mood in the cabin became light and relaxed. Except for Lena's row, she sat stiffly, lips pressed together, afraid to take out her sketch pouch, even though the plane was now safely in the air. Every time she looked toward the front of the cabin, her eyes caught the older attendant's sharp expression, her aunt noticed. "You can draw now," she whispered gently. "It's okay. You're allowed to." But Lena shook her head. "I don't want her to come back," her aunt sighed softly. "Nothing is going to happen." "You did nothing wrong," Lena nodded, but the fear stayed. A few seats away, a man who had seen the earlier interaction whispered to his partner, "The kid looks terrified." That wasn't right. His partner nodded quietly. Watching the older attendant with a worried frown near the front of the cabin, the younger attendant finished her checks and moved to speak with the lead attendant. He had already gathered some sense of the issue based on her earlier words. Now she explained in more detail how the older attendant had spoken harshly, how the child looked visibly shaken, and how passengers nearby had reacted. The lead attendant listened with a serious expression. He didn't raise his voice or show frustration, but something about the way his jaw tightened made it clear he took the matter seriously. "Where is she now?" he asked quietly. The younger attendant answered, "She's organizing the meal carts." The lead attendant nodded. "Stay with the passengers for now. I'll speak with her." Meanwhile, Lena tried to settle into her seat, but a sense of worry lingered. She kept replaying the earlier moment like a scene she couldn't turn off. Her aunt rubbed her shoulder gently. Sweetheart, I know that felt awful. But one bad moment doesn't make you wrong or bad. Sometimes adults talk in ways they shouldn't, Lena whispered. Why did she talk like that? I didn't do anything, her aunt exhaled sadly. People sometimes react too quickly without understanding the situation. But that doesn't mean you deserved it. Lena leaned against her aunt's arm and closed her eyes for a moment in the front galley. The lead attendant approached the older attendant. She looked busy adjusting packets and checking lists. She barely glanced up when he stepped near her. I need a moment, he said. She sighed, as if she knew what it might be about. If this is about the girl, I was following rules. Sharp objects aren't allowed out before takeoff. Her tone was defensive. He kept his voice steady. I understand safety rules, but tone matters. Several passengers noticed the way you spoke to her. She crossed her arms. Passengers always overreact. I was doing my job. He shook his head slightly. Your job also includes making sure people feel safe. A child was nearly in tears. That indicates a problem. The older attendant's expression stiffened. She'll be fine. Kids cry for anything. That answer made the lead attendant pause. Not in anger, but in disappointment. This isn't about crying. It's about how we communicate. The way you handled the situation was not appropriate. I need you to take a break from interacting with passengers for now. I'll cover your section. The older attendant's face tightened, but she stayed silent. She turned away, pretending to focus on something else. But it was clear she wasn't happy. Back in the aisle, the younger attendant approached Lena's row again. She crouched down with the same gentle smile. You doing any better? She asked softly. Lena shrugged. A little, her aunt added quietly. Thank you for checking on her. The attendant nodded. You're welcome. The lead attendant is aware of everything. You don't need to worry about her bothering you again, Lena blinked. Really? Really, the attendant said with a warm smile. And if you want to draw now, that's completely allowed. No one will say anything to you. Lena hesitated. Her hand hovered over her bag for a moment before she finally unzipped it and pulled out the sketch pouch. The familiar feel of it gave her a small spark of comfort. She took out her notebook and pencil, set them gently on the tray table. When she started drawing, her lines were shaky at first, but as she focused on the shapes forming on the page, her breathing became steadier. Her aunt smiled, watching her shoulders relax just a little. The man from earlier noticed too. Good, he whispered to his partner. At least someone is paying attention. Minutes passed. The plane traveled smoothly through the sky. Lena's sketch slowly took shape, a simple picture of clouds and a small house beneath them. Drawing always made her feel grounded, even when everything around her felt uncertain. But peace didn't last long. A passenger farther down the aisle pressed the call button. The younger attendant walked over to help, carrying a warm expression as she addressed their request. She had just finished assisting them when she felt a presence behind her. The older attendant. I can't believe they're making this an issue, the older woman muttered under her breath. She didn't say it loudly, but the frustration in her voice was clear. The younger attendant kept her voice calm. It's not an issue. It's communication. I did communicate, the woman snapped quietly. People these days are too sensitive. The younger attendant didn't respond. Getting into an argument in the aisle would only make things worse. But one thing was clear. The situation wasn't over yet. The lead attendant approached again, his voice firm but controlled. I asked you to take a break up front. Please follow that instruction. Passengers nearby glanced up. The older attendant pursed her lips tightly, then walked toward the front without another word. Back at her seat, Lena tried to pretend she hadn't noticed any of that. But she saw everything, the whispering, the tension, the looks exchanged. She wasn't a little kid who didn't understand. She just didn't know how to process it. Her aunt leaned close. You're safe. Focus on your drawing, okay? Lena nodded. She went back to her sketch, adding smaller details to the clouds, a few rows back. The man who had witnessed everything earlier finally pressed his call button. He waited until the younger attendant arrived and then lowered his voice. I just wanted to say, you're handling this really well. The way she spoke to that girl wasn't right. Thank you for stepping in. The attendant gave a tired but grateful smile. Thank you for saying that. We really do try our best to make sure everyone feels comfortable. Well, you're doing your best. Some people aren't, he said quietly. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Meanwhile, the lead attendant walked down the aisle to check on Lena personally. He knelt down near her row so he wouldn't tower over her. Hi there, he said gently. My crew told me what happened earlier. I just wanted to make sure you're okay and to let you know you did nothing wrong. Not a single thing. Lena's pencil paused. She stared at the page, trying not to get emotional again. Her aunt answered softly, Thank you for coming. She's still shaken, but she's feeling a little better now. The lead attendant nodded. If there's anything you need, anything at all, just let us know. We're here to help you enjoy the flight. Lena finally lifted her eyes. I can draw, right? His smile grew gentle. Of course you can. You can draw as much as you like. Lena let out a breath she'd been holding. The lead attendant placed a reassuring hand on the seat in front of him and then stood. You two, let me know if anyone bothers you again, he said before walking away. The reassurance helped, but the emotional weight of the earlier moment still hovered around Lena like a faint shadow she couldn't quite shake. She kept drawing, the soft scratch of the pencil calming her nerves. After a while, her lines became steadier, more confident. Her aunt watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt the piece, returning to the girl's expression. But even with this calm settling in, the story of the flight was far from finished. Some passengers were whispering about what they had seen. The crew was navigating tension behind the scenes. The older attendant was in the front galley, fuming quietly. And Lena, though slowly recovering, still felt a tightness in her chest from earlier. The flight was only just beginning, and soon the crew would be forced to step in again, not just with quiet reassurance, but with firm action that would change the entire tone of the journey. The plane moved smoothly through the sky. But inside the cabin, the air felt heavy. Even though most passengers seemed relaxed, there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't settled since the earlier incident. Some people whispered quietly, others exchanged glances, and a few kept looking toward the front of the plane, as if waiting for something else to happen. Lena felt that strange heaviness too. She tried to distract herself with her drawing, but sometimes her pencil paused without her realizing it. Her eyes drifted toward the aisle every few minutes, like she was waiting for someone to suddenly appear and scold her again. Her aunt noticed each time. You're safe. She kept whispering, offering small smiles, gentle reassurance, light touches on the girl's arm. No one is going to bother you again. Lena tried to believe her. She really did. But there were moments when doubt crept back in. The younger attendant walked by again with a warm smile, checking seat belts and making sure everyone was settled. When she passed Lena's row, she paused and lightly tapped the top of the seat in front of her. Your drawing looks really nice, she said softly. Lena looked up. Thank you. You feeling a little better now? The attendant asked. Lena nodded a little. The attendant smiled again before continuing down the aisle. Her presence alone made things feel a little lighter. Up at the front of the plane, the lead attendant was having a quiet but firm conversation with the pilot over the small communication phone. He explained the situation, the passenger reactions, and the behavior of the older attendant. The captain listened closely. Any conflict involving a minor had to be documented. Keep her away from the passengers until we land, the captain instructed calmly. We'll discuss it with ground staff once we arrive. The lead attendant agreed and hung up. He took a deep breath before stepping back into the galley, where the older attendant stood stiffly with her arms crossed. You need to stay here for now, he said. This isn't optional. She narrowed her eyes. So now they're running the plane? A kid and some strangers who think they know better? It's not about them, he replied. It's about your conduct. A child was frightened. We can't ignore that. She scoffed, turning away as if the conversation was beneath her. But even with her back turned, it was clear the tension wasn't fading. Back in the cabin, the younger attendant leaned against one of the seats for a moment to catch her breath. It had been a draining start to the flight. She glanced at Lena again, making sure the girl was still okay. A soft ding echoed through the cabin, the signal that passengers could move around freely. Some people stood up to stretch. Others made their way toward the restrooms. A child in the back giggled loudly, the sound playful and out of place compared to everything else. Lena closed her sketchbook for a moment and leaned back in her seat. "Do you think she's still angry?" she asked quietly. Her aunt tilted her head slightly. "She might be. But what matters is that the crew knows what happened. They won't let her come back here to bother you." Lena nodded slowly, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. A few rows behind her, the man who had spoken to the younger attendant earlier kept watching the front of the cabin. He whispered again to his partner, "This doesn't sit right." The lead attendant looked serious. His partner replied, "He's doing what he should. At least someone's addressing it." Up front, the lead attendant gave instructions to 2 other crew members. They needed to handle drink service without the older attendant, which meant more work for everyone. No one complained. They simply adjusted and moved forward. The drink carts rolled down the aisle. The younger attendant pushed one of them, smiling as she offered water, juice, and small snacks. When she reached Lena's row, she paused. "Do you want something to drink?" she asked the girl. Lena hesitated. "Water, please." "Sure thing." The attendant poured a small cup and handed it to her with a soft smile. "Let me know if you want anything else later." Lena nodded and held the cup carefully. Taking small sips, her aunt thanked the attendant before she moved on as the cart continued down the aisle. A sudden loud noise came from the front galley. It wasn't dangerous, just a metal container. That had slipped and hit the floor, but the sharp clang echoed through the cabin. Lena flinched so hard she spilled her water a little. Her aunt quickly grabbed a napkin. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a loud noise. Everything's fine." But Lena's eyes were wide again. Every part of her body was tense. A moment later, the lead attendant came out of the galley to check on the aisle. His face held a calm expression, but his posture showed the pressure he was under. He made his way back to Lena's row again and knelt beside her seat. "Did that sound scare you?" Lena nodded shyly. "It was just a container falling," he explained gently. "Nothing dangerous. You're completely safe, I promise." Her aunt smiled gratefully at him. "Thank you for checking." He nodded. "Of course, if she needs anything, tell us. We're here for her." The lead attendant stood and walked back up the aisle, making sure everything was running smoothly. A few minutes later, the younger attendant returned to Lena's row, holding a small packet. "I brought you a little snack," she said with a smile. "You don't have to eat it now. It's just for later, in case you want something." Lena held the packet carefully, almost unsure whether she should accept it, but the attendant gave her an encouraging nod. The girl whispered, "Thank you." "You're welcome," the attendant said warmly before continuing her work. The plane settled into a steady rhythm. People talked quietly, watched movies, napped, or flipped through magazines. The hum of the engines became a soothing background sound, but up in the front galley, the older attendant paced in frustration. She could hear bits of the crew talking outside the curtain. She felt isolated and embarrassed, though she would never admit it out loud. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "Over one kid, one little incident." But it wasn't ridiculous to the others. To the lead attendant, it was a serious breach of professionalism. To the younger attendant, it was compassion and responsibility. To the passengers who had watched it unfold, it was a moment that revealed character. And to Lena, it was something she would remember long after the flight was over. Back in her seat, the girl slowly began drawing again. She sketched clouds, tiny houses, little birds, anything that felt peaceful. Each line steadied her a little more. Her aunt watched her with a soft expression. She knew the drawing was helping, but she also knew that healing from embarrassment took time. After a while, the younger attendant returned to check on passengers one more time before her break. When she reached Lena, she took a moment to crouch again. "How's your drawing going?" she asked with a gentle smile. Lena showed her the page. It was filled with calm shapes and soft lines. "It's beautiful," the attendant said softly. "You're very talented." A shy smile formed on Lena's face. It was the first real smile since they'd boarded. The attendant stood again. But as she walked away, she noticed something behind her. A passenger, the same man from earlier, had his phone out, not recording now, just scrolling. But his expression showed concern. He called her over quietly. "I hate to bother you, but that lady up front, she looks upset. Is everything all right?" The attendant nodded calmly. "Everything's under control, sir. Thank you for your concern." He nodded back, trusting her professionalism. But inside, the attendant knew things were still fragile. The older attendant wasn't calming down. The stress among the crew was building, and Lena, though slowly recovering, was still uneasy. The flight wasn't even halfway through. Hours remained, and everyone could feel the quiet tension lingering in the air. The younger attendant took a slow breath and walked toward the front again, preparing herself. She knew the lead attendant might need help. She knew the older attendant might need another reminder to stay in the galley. Most of all, she knew that any small misstep could shake the cabin again. Meanwhile, Lena finished her drawing and set her pencil down. She looked outside the window at the clouds drifting by. They looked soft, peaceful, untouched by anything happening inside the plane. She rested her head on her aunt's shoulder. "Do you think the rest of the flight will be okay?" she whispered. Her aunt stroked her hair gently. "Yes," she said softly, "because there are good people here looking out for us." Lena closed her eyes, and though the plane continued forward in silence, everyone on board sensed that something important was about to happen, something that would finally push the crew to step in fully. Not just with quiet comfort, but with real action. The turning point was coming. No one knew exactly when, but it was close. The moment the lead attendant walked away with the older attendant, the air inside the cabin changed. People who had been pretending not to notice now looked around with quiet concern. Lena sat very still in her upgraded seat, her hands folded together the way someone folds them when they are trying not to shake. Her aunt sat beside her, speaking softly so only Lena could hear. She kept reminding Lena that she had done nothing wrong and that none of what happened was her fault. But Lena's eyes still carried the weight of everything that had happened. The junior crew member, the same one who had noticed Lena's distress earlier, came by again with 2 warm blankets. She did not say much, just offered a gentle smile and asked if Lena wanted water or juice. Lena nodded slightly and whispered for some water. The crew member nodded back and moved quietly, like she understood that even calm kindness could feel too loud in moments like this. The aunt watched all this, grateful but still hurting inside. She had wanted this flight to be something special for Lena, a simple trip that would give her a fun memory. But instead she was sitting next to a child who kept lowering her gaze every time someone walked by. Afraid that another angry voice might call her out for something she did not do. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, the lead attendant and the older attendant were having a conversation that sounded calm from afar. But up close, it was filled with tension. The lead attendant kept her tone level. She reminded the older attendant of the airline's rules: respect, communication, patience, empathy. She repeated each word slowly, making sure nothing was misunderstood. The older attendant insisted she had been following the rules and that the girl had looked suspicious with her pouch. But the lead attendant stopped her and said that no matter what she thought she saw, the way she spoke to a young passenger had crossed every line. The older attendant lifted her chin, slightly as if to defend herself again. But when she saw the seriousness in the lead attendant's expression, she stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that pushed people to reflect. She folded her arms gently, no longer in defiance, but more in realization that she may have handled things poorly in the cabin. The junior crew member returned with the water for Lena and placed it on the little tray table. She bent down just enough to make eye contact. She did not use the tone adults sometimes use when they try too hard with children. Instead, she spoke as though Lena was someone whose feelings mattered. She said that the rest of the crew was there for her. Then she quietly added that she had already told the captain what had happened, so he could make sure everything was handled correctly. The aunt squeezed Lena's hand, and for the first time since the whole scene began, Lena's shoulders relaxed a little. The kindness was reaching her in small waves. The passengers nearby had witnessed enough to understand that something was wrong. Some of them looked at Lena with sympathetic expressions. A man sitting across the aisle leaned over at one point and said in a gentle voice that she was very brave. A woman a few rows ahead turned around and offered a small pack of cookies she had brought on the flight. None of them crowded her or tried to make a big moment out of it. They simply tried, in their own small ways, to make the child feel like the world was not as harsh as the moment she had just lived in the galley. The lead attendant finished her conversation with the older attendant and returned to the front of the plane. She paused before stepping back into the cabin, taking a quiet breath. She had handled many situations in her years of work, but few weighed on her like this one. She knew that when a child is hurt, even unintentionally, the responsibility to fix it becomes heavier. She walked back to Lena and her aunt, kneeling beside their seats. She apologized again, in a soft voice, clearer and more personal than the earlier apology. She explained that a full report was being filed and that the captain was aware. She also mentioned that once they landed, the airline's supervisor would meet them to discuss what happened and make sure they were treated fairly. Lena looked at her aunt, then back at the lead attendant. She whispered something that only her aunt heard. "Will it happen again?" Her aunt looked heartbroken, because that question held more weight than Lena even understood. The lead attendant, noticing the exchange, responded without hesitation. She promised that she and the rest of the crew were going to make sure Lena felt safe for the rest of the flight. There was no grand speech or loud announcement, just a promise spoken with sincerity. The flight continued smoothly for the next hour. The attendants took turns checking on Lena without making her feel watched. They offered small comforts, more water, a warm towel, fresh headphones for the in-flight screen. But they did these things in a quiet, gentle way, giving Lena space to return to herself. At one point, the junior attendant returned and offered something unexpected, a small deck of cards from the airline's kid activity pack. She asked Lena if she wanted to learn a simple card game. Lena hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted attention. But after a moment, she nodded. The attendant taught her a game involving matching numbers and colors. It was simple, yet it brought small smiles back to Lena's face. Her aunt joined in too, glad to see the shift in her niece's expression. The man across the aisle watched the moment unfold and smiled behind his book. He glanced at the woman with the cookies, who smiled back. The energy in that little section of the plane, once heavy and filled with tension, had softened. Farther back, the older attendant remained quiet. She continued doing her tasks, but with noticeably slower movements. Several crew members glanced at her every now and then, checking that she was keeping distance from Lena's row. The lead attendant had been clear. She was not to serve or approach the child in any way for the rest of the flight, as the flight neared its midpoint. The captain made his usual announcement about altitude and weather conditions. But after the routine update, he added one more line. He said that his crew was committed to making sure every passenger felt comfortable. If anyone needed anything, they should not hesitate to call. It was a simple message, but the crew knew why he added it. The captain was communicating the same thing the crew had been trying to show through their actions. That respect and care were not optional. They were essential. Lena leaned her head on her aunt's shoulder after finishing another round of the card game. Her breathing had steadied. Her eyes no longer darted around nervously. She was still quiet, but she no longer looked afraid. Her aunt brushed her hair gently and whispered that she was proud of her. As the hours passed, the plane continued smoothly. Meals were served. Lights dimmed slightly. People settled in to rest or watch movies. But the crew remained attentive. The junior attendant stopped by one last time before her break and asked Lena if she wanted anything else. Lena shook her head but whispered a thank you. It was the first time she had spoken. Loud enough for the attendant to hear clearly. The attendant smiled and said Lena's thank you meant more than she knew. Even though the older attendant stayed near the back of the plane, she could see Lena from a distance. She watched the child laugh quietly with her aunt, watched the passengers' supportive looks, watched the crew handle their duties with calm steadiness. She stood there for a long moment, holding a tray she no longer needed. In that stillness, something softened in her expressions, something that suggested she had begun to understand the impact of her actions. The lead attendant returned to Lena's row once more before service ended. She checked in gently, asked if Lena needed anything, and thanked the aunt again for her patience. She reminded them that everything was being documented properly, and that the captain had already communicated with the ground team. The aunt nodded. She had not forgotten the painful beginning of this journey, but she also recognized the sincere efforts that followed. She knew that people make mistakes, but she also believed strongly in accountability. Watching the crew step up the way they did showed her that there were still people willing to correct wrongs with integrity. Lena eventually drifted to sleep, her head leaning against the soft window pillow the crew had brought earlier. Her aunt adjusted the blanket gently over her and watched her breathe, grateful that the worst part of the experience had passed. Outside the window, clouds moved slowly beneath them. The airplane hummed with a steady sound, a kind of reminder that although the world had moments of conflict and hurt, it also had moments of calm that followed, as the cabin lights dimmed even more. The lead attendant walked quietly up the aisle one last time. When she passed Lena's row, she paused and looked at the child sleeping peacefully. She nodded to herself, relieved. The flight was not over, and they still had a responsibility to carry through until landing. But for now, Lena was safe, calm, and cared for. The cabin settled into that stillness that only happens on long flights. Soft breathing, low movie voices, the faint clatter of dishes being cleaned in the back. And in that stillness, one thing became clear. What had begun as a painful moment for a young girl was slowly being reshaped by the actions of people who chose to do the right thing. The flight was not just moving through the sky. It was moving toward a resolution, one that would continue the moment the wheels touched the ground. The cabin stayed dim as the plane continued its long path through the sky. Lena was still asleep, her head resting gently on her aunt's shoulder. Her breathing was slow and peaceful, and her aunt didn't move even an inch, afraid to disturb her. She kept one arm around the child, as if guarding the calm that had finally settled over her. After everything Lena had gone through earlier, this quiet moment felt like something precious. The junior crew member passed by the row, saw Lena sleeping, and nodded with a soft smile. She didn't stop or speak, not wanting to wake her, but she made a mental note to bring something warm for Lena later in case. She woke up feeling unsure or scared again. Several passengers around them had already drifted into their own quiet space, some sleeping, some watching movies with headphones, some staring at the soft glow of the aisle lights. But every now and then, a few of them glanced at Lena. There was something about her small, resting figure that made people think about the earlier scene and reflect on how fragile a child's confidence can be at the back of the plane. The older attendant sat alone for a moment. She had been working, of course, helping with meal cleanup, drink refills, and small tasks that kept the flight flowing. But now she finally had a short break. She leaned against the counter in the galley, staring at the stainless steel wall for a long time. Her reflection looked back at her tired eyes, a stiff posture, and a face that carried something she hadn't allowed herself to feel earlier. She thought back to the moment when she had raised her voice at the child. It had happened so fast. She had convinced herself she was doing her job, that she was enforcing rules and keeping order. But now, hours later, she saw her actions differently. She remembered how Lena had looked up at her with fear, how the passengers had gone silent, how the lead attendant had pulled her aside with that serious, disappointed tone. Regret was a heavy thing, and as it settled into her, the older attendant closed her eyes. No one had forced her to reflect. No one had lectured her beyond the stern conversation earlier. But sometimes the silence after conflict was louder than any words. Up in the front of the plane, the lead attendant and the captain were finishing a small report the airline required for incidents involving minors. The captain's voice remained steady and professional, but there was an unmistakable concern in his expression. He had children himself, and situations like this always hit a little closer to home. He wanted to make sure that, when they landed, the ground team handled everything with care and clarity. "Thank you for managing it," the captain said to the lead attendant. She nodded. "She's a sweet kid. She didn't deserve any of that." "No child does," he replied. In the cabin, the lights brightened slightly as the crew prepared for the final service before landing. The gentle chatter of people waking up mixed with the sound of carts rolling out. Lena woke slowly, blinking a few times as she tried to understand her surroundings again. She sat up a little straighter, rubbing her eyes, and her aunt smiled softly. "Did you sleep okay?" she whispered. Lena nodded. Yeah, I think so. Her voice was small but steadier than before. Her aunt brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. We're getting closer. Maybe 2 more hours. Lena looked around the cabin, checking faces, checking the aisles, checking whether anything or anyone felt threatening. When she saw the junior crew member coming toward her with a cup of warm tea for the aunt and a small cup of apple juice for her, Lena's shoulders softened again. I brought this for you, the attendant said kindly. Only if you want it. Lena nodded and accepted the cup, whispering a thank you. The attendant didn't linger long. But before walking away, she said one more thing in a quiet voice. You're doing great. Lena watched her leave, and something inside her warmed at the words. A while later, the older attendant approached the front of the cabin to hand off a checklist. She passed by Lena's row but kept her eyes forward, out of respect for the boundaries the lead attendant had set. But for a moment, just a small human moment, she slowed down. She didn't speak and didn't interrupt anything. She only glanced briefly at Lena, then away again, her expression showing an apology she hadn't yet found the courage to say out loud. The lead attendant noticed this from a distance. She sighed quietly, not in frustration, but in a way that showed she understood how complicated human emotions could be as they grew closer to their destination. The captain announced they would begin descending soon. The crew prepared the cabin, collected trash, and helped passengers settle in for landing. Lena tucked her blanket around her legs, and her aunt made sure she had gum in case her ears bothered her. The woman with the cookies from earlier, leaned over the seat and whispered, You were very brave today. Tone wasn't dramatic, just gentle and honest. Lena offered a shy smile. Thank you. The man across the aisle lifted his head from his book and nodded at her. You handled everything really well. Lena didn't know what to say, but she felt something shift inside her, feeling that maybe the world wasn't as frightening as it had seemed earlier. As the plane descended, the clouds outside the window thinned. The land below grew clearer. Lena stared out, watching roads, houses, and patches of green come into view. Her aunt placed a hand on her back in a supportive way. When the wheels finally touched the ground, a soft jolt ran through the cabin. People began clapping lightly, relieved to have completed the long trip. Lena let out a small breath she had been holding. The lead attendant approached their row as the plane taxied toward the gate. She spoke quietly so no one else would overhear. A supervisor is already waiting outside. She wants to speak with you both. She knows what happened and wants to make sure everything is handled properly. The aunt nodded. Thank you for everything you did. Truly. The attendant smiled softly. We just wanted her to feel safe. That's our job too. When the doors finally opened, the passengers began stepping out row by row. Many of them took one last look at Lena, offering little smiles or nods. They didn't crowd her. They didn't turn the moment into a scene. They just wanted her to know they cared. Lena and her aunt stepped into the jet bridge, where a woman wearing an airport badge stood waiting. She had a calm, reassuring expression. She greeted them with warmth and invited them to a private corner near the gate. I heard what happened, the supervisor said. I'm so sorry you went through that. We're reviewing everything. We'll document it carefully, and we'll make sure proper steps are taken. She didn't rush her words or hide behind formal language. She spoke with sincerity. And Lena's aunt appreciated that more than anything. She explained that the airline had already received the captain's and crew's reports. She asked Lena how she was feeling. Lena hesitated at first, then said quietly, I'm okay now. The supervisor nodded. I'm glad. And I want you to know that what happened should not have happened. You deserved respect. You deserve kindness. Lena's aunt listened carefully, making sure everything was clear. She wasn't interested in anger or arguments. She just wanted fairness and a promise that other children would not experience something like this. After the conversation ended, the supervisor handed Lena a small card with a gentle design on the front. It's just something from the airline, she said. A small gesture. We hope you'll remember the kindness on this flight more than the hurt. Lena accepted it, holding it carefully like it was something fragile as they walked toward baggage claim. The weight of the day slowly lifted. Lena looked up at her aunt and asked, Do you think the other passengers were really worried about me? Her aunt smiled softly. Yes, they cared. And the crew cared. Sometimes people make mistakes, but other people step up to fix them. That's part of the world too. Lena nodded thoughtfully. She didn't feel scared now. She didn't feel small. She felt seen. She felt supported. They collected their bags and stepped out into the airport, where the noise of rolling suitcases, announcements, and rushing crowds filled the air. But even with all the noise, Lena felt calm. She slipped her hand into her aunt's and said quietly, "Thank you for staying with me." Aunt squeezed her hand. Always. And as they walked out together, Lena carried with her not just the memory of a moment when someone had spoken to her harshly, but the much stronger memory of how many people had stood up, shown kindness, and reminded her that even when one moment goes wrong, there are dozens of moments that can help put things right again.